The Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross was founded in Scotland and is a living branch of the original fraternity of German Theosophists, or true Rosicrucians, a brotherhood and sisterhood of Christ and the Blessed Sophia of Holy Wisdom. They had a very special interconnection with the previous brotherhood of the Cathars, otherwise known as the Pure Ones, who were hunted down with enthusiasm and persecuted by the Church until wiped out. The Cathars were devotees of John the Divine and carried the gospel in their cloaks at all times. They revered the relationship between Mary and Jesus, believed they bore children, and taught about duality, peace, and unconditional love. It is written that after being horrendously tortured, the Cathars revealed having received and protected the Book of Love. According to the legends about the mysterious manuscript, it is attributed to Jesus, who gave it to John the Divine, and was written by the Christed One himself. In the esoteric tradition, the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross was said to have been founded in the 15th century by an alchemical adept known as Christian Rosenquartz. He was a contemporary of Sir William St. Clair, founder of Rosslyn Chapel, and coincidentally, they both died in 1484. Is it possible that the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross received these secret Cathar teachings? Could this knowledge have been passed down through family bloodlines like the St. Clairs, the chapel builders of Rosslyn, and hereditary grandmasters of Freemasonry? Before we can answer these questions, we need to take a closer look at the St. Clair's family history. No certain record exists, but it is likely that the St. Clairs came from St. Clair in Normandy. The St. Clairs first went to England before they came to Scotland with William the Conqueror during his invasion of England. William of St. Clair accompanied St. Margaret of Scotland, daughter of Edward the Exile, to Scotland in 1068, where she eventually married Malcolm III of Scotland. In return for his efforts, the king granted St. Clair the barony of Rosslyn. The chiefs of Clan St. Clair all descend from Sir William St. Clair, who was Sheriff of Edinburgh and who was granted the barony of Rosslyn in 1280. Until the 18th century, the St. Clairs were hereditary Grand Masters of Freemasonry in Scotland. The last male representative of the Rosslyn St. Clairs, Sir William, who had no male heir himself, gave up the hereditary right in 1736, which led to the creation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, who elected him as their first Grand Master. Strangely, Sir William was not in fact a Freemason, and had to first be initiated by the Lodge before he could take up his title. After his death in 1778, Sir William was buried in Rosslyn Chapel with full Masonic honors. Being an intelligent man, he made other arrangements to overcome the difficulties presented by his lack of a male heir. He chose to sell the Rosslyn estates, including the chapel, to General James Sinclair, who was himself a direct descendant of the chapel builder. Selling Rosslyn to him ensured that it was kept in the hands of the male descendants of the original builder. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the chapel lay abandoned. A new period of restoration began after the church had been all but practically forgotten with the passing of time. It wasn't until the 3rd Earl of Rosslyn, General James Sinclair Erskine, bought the chapel that new restoration started between 1837 and the 1840s. Rosslyn records indicate that the current windows were installed between 1867 and 1887. According to Rosslyn Chapel, while the art form of stained glass has ancient origins, it reached its heights of popularity during the medieval period, used in churches as a means of illustrating biblical stories for the illiterate congregations, often referred to as the poor man's Bible, for their ability to tell stories without using words. I will attempt to decode the story being conveyed within one of these windows, a potential secret in stained glass that captured my imagination while touring Rosslyn. What I first noticed along the north and south aisles of the church is that the windows tell the New Testament story of the life and death of Jesus Christ. One window in particular, towards the end of the successionary tale, caught my eye amongst all the other stained glass. It's the only stained glass window that portrays St. Isa, as I prefer to call Jesus, holding a child. At his feet, the Magdalena is also holding a baby, and to the left of them both stands an older child. The St. Clair's connection to Scottish Freemasonry is important in determining what these particular secrets in stained glass could symbolically mean. They would have had occult, otherwise known as hidden knowledge, and likely inherited teachings from the underground stream of Gnosis passed down by their families' bloodlines. All the other windows held important characters from the biblical stories. For these children to just be random portrayals was, in my opinion, highly unlikely. They must have held some significance. Otherwise, why would the chapel builders include them in the storyline of St. Isa's life before his death? It's no secret any longer that Isa and Mary likely had children, based on new evidence that continues to be dug up from deep beneath the earth, buried in an effort to preserve these important documents from the ancient fires. While in Ireland, I discovered the Book of Kells, written by monks on the Scottish Isle of Iona, which includes 3 pages of the genealogy of Christ. Both the UK and Ireland have many stories about the Grail families. As I studied the information provided to me by Rosslyn Chapel, I noticed they named each of the windows according to their part in the storyline. Window numbered 16, Christ blessing little children, and the Last Supper. What did the Last Supper have to do with the blessing of little children prior to the crucifixion? What I discovered, if you go back far enough, digging deeper into the esoteric traditions, is that the ritual breaking of bread and drinking of wine, otherwise known as the Eucharist, has been a long-held rite. However, it didn't take on the same meaning to the ancients as it does today when taking communion. The bread and the wine didn't always symbolize the body and blood of Christ. It was in fact an ancient fertility rite, a symbolic representation of sacred union, the alchemical wedding, otherwise known as hieros gamos, the sexual union between a god and goddess. To the esoteric Grail Church and the Knights Templars, Mary Magdalena was always regarded as a saint, and is still revered as such by many today. The interesting fact of this sainthood is that Mary is recognized as the patron saint of wine growers, the guardian of the vine. In other words, Mary Magdalena is the guardian of the sacred bloodline of the Holy Grail. In ancient fertility rites, the wine was symbolic of a woman's moon blood, which gives rise to new life only through the portal of the divine feminine's womb. The tradition of blood sacrifice has ancient origins in the sacrifice of a woman's moon blood. The menstrual blood was given freely in those days, and then used to nourish the tribe or the earth in other ways. As time went on, these traditions were corrupted into actual blood sacrifices of animals, humans, and sadly even the blood of innocent children was spilt. The blood from the womb, symbolized by the wine, nourished the unborn child, and was believed to have mana, or breath of life. The word menstruation comes from the Greek mensis, meaning both the moon and power, and men meaning month. The Latin term later became the Christian Eucharist. The bread of life, or the sexual seed, was represented by the wheat, symbolizing the sacred masculine. At the culmination of the fertility rituals, the high priestess would make love with the high priest. From this seed, from the grain, when mixed with the holy cup of sacred wine or moon blood, new life springs forth. The Superman and Superwoman, the Adam, Christo, the Eve, Christa, the golden child of sexual alchemy. According to the Encyclopedia of Wicca and Witchcraft, the teachings of the grain are intimately connected to the fermentation mysteries. The dried seed, planted in the soil, symbolizes the meeting of the goddess and the lord of the underworld, the emergence of physical life. The young sprouts that first appear having broken through the soil are symbolic of rebirth into the physical dimension. The plant itself is God, the child of promise. In time, the newborn God eventually becomes the harvest lord, and his life energy in the form of a new seed will be returned to the earth to impregnate the goddess. From this sacred union, new life comes forth again. The very essence of the god is contained in the seed or grain, and in the grape or blood. The intoxicating power of the fermented grain was believed to be the very presence of the God within a person's body. This ancient concept is the basis for the Wiccan tradition of cakes and wine. In the Celtic Gnostic Mass tradition, Tautia Douglas, a Gnostic bishop and author of the book Secrets of the Serpent Bloodline, writes, "The ceremony is led by a priest and priestess, the altar divided into a male and female side. The priest works on the feminine side and the priestess works on the masculine side, all the while bringing balance to the energies. The archangels are invoked, bringing the qualities of all the elements into the ceremony. The priestess purifies and the priest consecrates. When the temple is ready, the Eucharist is prepared by the priest and the priestess on the center altar. A symbolic act of union between the energies is performed, and all present partake in the Eucharist, which is charged with the energy raised." We can also use the sacred texts of Gnosticism found in the Nag Hammadi library to illustrate how the Last Supper ritual of the Eucharist truly symbolizes sacred union. There are 5 sacred rites listed in the Gnostic scriptures: baptism, chrism, wedding feast, ransom, and the bridal chamber. The term wedding feast is what Christian Gnostics call the Eucharist of bread and wine, while the term bridal chamber implies the mystery of hieroskamos and sacred marriage. Although the idea of redemption from sin may play a role in the rite of the Holy Eucharist as performed in some traditions of Gnostic Christianity, the true nature of salvation is in fact quite different. The idea is not so much a salvation from original sin, but salvation by restoration to the original blessing, which occurs in the unification of male and female. Accordingly, the bread represents the Logos, and the wine represents the Sophia, the male and female aspects of the Christos. Thus, the Eucharist is a ceremony celebrating their mystical union, or sacred marriage, the union of the sacred masculine and divine feminine, through which all creation transpires, as well as redemption through divine illumination. With this new knowledge in mind, the placement of the Last Supper, presiding Christ blessing little children, makes perfect sense in relation to the storyline of Isa's human life. The blessing of little children is exactly what Saint Isa and Saint Mary received following their sacred union together, symbolized by the bread and the wine at the Last Supper. Especially when the figure sitting next to Christ in the Last Supper above appears to be a woman dressed in red with her head on his shoulder, not John as the Bible story claims. Art historians have noted that Mary was often depicted wearing red, whereas the Virgin Mary is seen wearing blue in medieval artwork. This is how I've learned to tell the difference myself when looking at works of art, or in this case, stained glass windows. If the windows are telling the life and death story of Jesus, starting with the Annunciation and ending with the risen Christ, in a particular procession based on the New Testament, when did the blessing of the children come into play after the Last Supper in the biblical story? Also questionable is the absence of Mary Magdalene from the biblical version of this story. One shouldn't ignore these questions just because they can't point to the Bible to answer them. These secrets in stained glass can be looked at as both an allegorical story of sacred union, as well as hinting towards the historical children of Saint Isa and Saint Mary. It shouldn't be difficult to conclude he likely would have borne children and then passed down to them his extraordinary teachings. Some have argued that Isa survived the crucifixion, and others will argue that it never took place, that it's only a story based on astral theology. Regardless of your own opinions or beliefs, the historical Mary Magdalena, his most beloved disciple, surely would have passed on to her children the greater mysteries. Indeed, their golden children would have continued this tradition of passing on the knowledge through the underground stream of Gnosis, and no doubt in secret, in order to avoid persecution. Was the Book of Love that the Cathars possessed part of these sacred union mysteries? Could the Gospel of John the Divine be John Martinus, the male heir born of the sacred union between Isa and Mary, as the Scottish legends suggest? Until the Book of Love is unearthed, we may never know, but legend says John Martinus arrived on the Isle of Iona, a Scottish isle, within his mother's belly after her exile from the Holy Land. It is written that he was raised and initiated by the priestesses in the ancient nunnery, while Mary later sailed to France. These are questions I'm still asking myself, and will cover in greater detail in my next video on the prophecy of Iona and the Grail legends. Please like and share my videos, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to stay up to date on future uploads. You can also find my blog by visiting the link in the About section, The Greater Mysteries for the Modern Day Mystic.